Hey guys, just came across an article that Tricolor, which is a sort of a car lending shadow institution type thing. So they get a lot of their um, money for their car loans and stuff like that in America from primarily sort of shadow banking and some of the major players like Barclays and JP Morgan as an example. But they've just sort of a couple of weeks back they sort of filed for bankruptcy, so they just out of the whole system. I'll just put it on. Let me just share this before I go into more details in that regard. So this is the ABC 13 Eyewitness News in America. So this is their Houston outlet. So don't give me hell about if you think that this is a bad media outlet. Remember, I live in Australia. I've just come across, heard about it, and looked into it and found this newsreel, and that's what I'm using. So if you don't like it, that's your problem. I better leave it. I better leave it in there. In that regard. So anyway, let me just listen in as well. So Tricolor Auto Dealers has filed for bankruptcy, and they have something like, I saw in the other article that they have about 100,000 loans out, well over 100,000. So the court records confirmed Tricolor has more than $1 billion in liabilities and between 1 to 10 billion in assets as it filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy. So it seems a bit weird that they've got just a billion in. I mean, okay, if you've only got a billion in assets, okay, you're pretty much done. But if you've got 10 billion, that's only 10% of your assets. So what's going on. It's very hard to actually know. Um, what I have spoken in the past is about the biggest problem around the West, in particular in America. It's escalating due to money printing, which is suppressing purchasing power of the population. And already people are maxed out on credit card debt, on the household debt is really high, as I did in the previous video. There's this inability to grow because of that. I know the euro dollar guy, he's actually really smart. He understands far better than me because he's been looking into the euro dollar system for longer than I have and really understands it. And he's got an academic level qualifications in the area, and he does understand how that system works and how that global credit system works, and how they repackage stuff. So your mortgage-backed securities, your collateral debt obligations, CDOs, all these are sort of ways of packaging debt and selling it to investors. And there's different grades, different investment grade as they call it. So if you're at the top AAA, you may have lower risk of that of that debt when it goes junk. Where somebody further down has got is going to have greater losses. So they usually call them mezzanine levels of investors. But fundamentally, when we've got a bit of a boom, the economy's growing, doing really well, and all that, people are making money. And that's why people jump into these vehicles. They're getting reasonable returns. It sort of works well. But now we're moving into a situation where things are maxing out. Debts have got really out of control across the board. And there's a lot of instability globally, warfare, trade wars, rivalries between major powers that are trying to move up the pecking order, so to speak, and all this is creating levels of tension and instability, and obviously it's going to hit the markets at some point. I thought, personally, I thought, that there would be other areas of the actual market that would actually implode first. That you would see, like, where I was expecting was the retail, sort of, not the retail sector, in terms, in its totality, parts of the retail sector, and also, you know, sort of non-residential real estate, like anything to do with certain services or certain business activities, anything to do with that. That those, as businesses were, smaller business in particular, were struggling and going out of business. A lot of those malls, a lot of those commercial sort of real estate type areas would have less and less occupancy. That less and less occupancy would also exacerbate the inability of these people to, especially with the rising interest rates. I thought that's where the initial explosion in the markets would happen. And that's what would really set off the next big crisis. But I could be wrong. It could be basically this part of the shadow banking sector that's actually supporting these sort of loans, car loans, and all that. And maybe that's the new subprime. They're calling it the auto subprime. Some people have. It's not something that's widespread yet, the term, but it's a possibility that it could start here and then affect the rest of the economy. And nobody knows what the exposure levels are either. So it's really concerning, to say the least. Let me just go back and just... Okay.
We've been following this story for a while, from cars locked behind chains and padlocks to some empty lots. Nearly 2 weeks ago, used car retailer Tricolor filed for bankruptcy. We then learned one of its lenders is being investigated for fraud.
I think it was they filed on the 11th, but I could be wrong either. Because what she's saying is 2 weeks ago is September the 10th. I think it was the 11th that it was actually done, which is about 2 weeks. I think it was that, but I could be wrong.
So here are the facts. Tricolor ran 6 locations in Houston. Today, customers tell us they still do not have many answers. ABC 13's Daniela Hurtado has been trying to get to the bottom of this case from the start, reporting now from one of the dealer's old locations.
Empty car lots, lights off, and little to no communication for customers that are wondering what's next for Tricolor Auto Dealership. I can tell you this afternoon that the Texas DMV confirms they're currently investigating more than 150 complaints against the dealership.
Well, when you have so many complaints, that sort of indicates to me that this company was struggling to meet its financial obligations. Because you can't have that level of complaints. It means that things were being delayed. When people start delaying things, service drops and many other things like that start happening, it means that the company's under pressure, and it's most likely financial pressure in the majority of cases. So that sort of like is a red flag that there's a problem with that dealership. And the more complaints you hear, that's another reason why when you hear a lot of complaints about a place that, a lot of dissatisfaction, things being delayed and stuff like that, if you're considering, don't, is basically the golden rule there. Sometimes best to wait, let it all play out the way it is, then you can always come in at a later stage and probably get some really good deals and at a discounted price. So just keep that in mind. If you haven't ventured into that sort of arena, if you have, well, you need to basically go and get some. I can't give you any financial advice. You need to go and get some financial advice and consider your options in that regard. But obviously, this sort of situation with Tricolor is concerning. Yes, it is one. It is a major, auto dealership, and what's happening with the others? Could this be the new auto subprime boom explosion? We had the last one in the sort of the low end real estate type part of the market, the residential, the sort of the low end real estate market segment. Could this be the new one that does the damage in that regard? I mean, a lot of sectors of the economy are under a lot of stress. There's a lot of debt and a lot of the financial instruments that are out there. Let's say, their ratings have really dropped in real terms. Obviously, they haven't been re-rated. Usually that doesn't happen unless an organisation is under pressure for whatever reason. But, if you're holding on to anything that you're concerned about, maybe a good idea to get rid of it at this stage. Make it somebody else's problem is what I'm saying. I know it's not careless. You're basically looking, because everybody's doing the same thing. Whoever's left with holding the bucket at the end is the one that pays the bill. So it's the way it goes. That's life. Life's not fair. I'm just telling you what's happening at the moment in this area, and that things aren't looking as good as a couple of years ago. There's been, and it's not merely, a lot of people think, this sort of the trade, tariff wars, the high government spending. Yes, all that puts stresses on the system, but they're not the main things. The big things that actually determine whether the economy goes in one direction or another is pretty much the supply of money and the purchasing power of the population. Those are the two things. One is controlled by the central banks. The other is controlled by how well the overall community that's involved in the market, because businesses and people are active participants in the market. The government just regulates. They're not, they may sometimes come in and interfere or intervene, as they call it. I call it interference. But fundamentally, it's humans and businesses that are basically the players. And, when things get a bit out of control, a bit over exuberant, things are pushed too far, things do tend to fall apart. But what we have now is more systemic. What we have is, what happens every 80 to 100 years when the society accumulates a massive level of debt, and you get to such a high level of debt that all you need is one or two things to go really bad to blow the whole system apart. We're back much closer to a 1929 situation than we have been for a very long time. I thought it was 2008 when I was talking to my mate from another mother, my brother from another mother, in 2006 when I was in Bali in November. I was sitting in Sanur, that's right, in Sanur, at a coffee shop, and I actually called him and I told him that we're heading for another 1929 type situation. Then a lot of QE and a lot of money was thrown into the system to bolster the system, something that I didn't expect would happen, because it was like massive moral hazard in traditional economic terms. And I thought, okay, that's interesting. They've done that, and initially I held back, and then I noticed that there was more money going into the market, more money that going in the market. Like anyone, you jump back in because you go, well, I'm going to miss out on all that growth. And if I put it into gold, yes, in terms of gold, it will, but I'm going to make far more from this reckless behavior in the markets than I'm going to make from holding gold or anything else. Gold you want to hold at the end, not at the beginning. So, because you're going to lose a lot of growth, even though it's funny money growth, that's where you have to be. I don't think they can do it anymore. It's got to the level where a lot of investors are not interested. You can see that Japan, most of the debt, 80% of the debt is held by the central bank. And more investors are only want to buy short-term debt because they're not very comfortable with holding on to anything long-term because they have trust issues with a lot of these institutions and businesses and governments. And so some of the smarter players, big players, are diversifying their holdings globally to sort of spread out and provide themselves with a bit more protection. Others are buying as many cheap assets as they can and hoping that they will appreciate in the long term. So there's a lot of different strategies that people are taking. Other people are buying things like artwork, precious things like diamonds and whatever else. Other people are parking money into gold and silver. So there's a lot of things that people are doing currently to protect, because at this stage, forget about trying to make money. You're not going to be making money. You're going to be ripping up money if you stay in for too long. Nobody knows. I don't know. Nobody knows when it's going to all go pear-shaped. But at this stage, what you want to do is you want to protect your wealth, whether you want to move more and more. I mean, if you can offload stuff and cut back your debt to practically very little, you in a society where you have a major 1930s situation, the people that have got the most assets and money and practically very little debt are the ones that become credit worthy to the remaining institutions. The remaining institutions will gravitate to those people because they say, well, they don't have much debt or zero debt. They got substantially more assets than the majority of the rest of the society, and they've got certain hard currency as well and other things. Under those sort of circumstances, you're better to be in that sort of situation than to be uncredit worthy, because like the 1930s right through, credit was very tight, and because a lot of wealth had been destroyed, and it was focused on a very small amount of people that could access at the time and gain from those opportunities. And also the appreciation of those assets happened over a longer period of time. So banks would only lend to people that were in a much better position. So we could end up back in that world. The WEF would like us back in that world. You'll own nothing and you'll be happy, apparently. But the world isn't in a stable, good place at the moment. The world's in very unstable territory, and we need to understand that. And we need to stop thinking, oh, it's going to come back. What we've done is we've kept the whole system going with printing money, borrowing and borrowing and borrowing. There is a point where you can't do that anymore, and it starts to become corrosive to the system and the society. But the biggest one that does the most damage is the lack of purchasing power of the population. You can produce all the goods and services. China produces a lot of goods and services. Guess what? It's struggling also to sell things because not as many buyers in their own country and in the West and elsewhere. People are tightening up out of either necessity or out of fear. Both are putting a lot of pressure on the whole system. And there are many companies that are not making enough money, are shedding staff, and you have a sort of a downward spiral. Less consumption leads to more less consumption, and then more less consumption, and on and on, like in the 1930s. So yes, Klaus from the WEF may get his actual achieve his goal of most of the society owning nothing, so, and living in a sort of a rentier society like in the 1930s. Awful, but a possible reality.
Oh, very angry.
Christopher Pickens and his family traded in their old car and bought this new vehicle from Tricolor Auto just last month.
And the vehicle we traded in, when is it going to be paid for? Because that's damaging my credit.
That's the billion-dollar question. Court records confirm Tricolor Auto has more than $1 billion in liabilities and between $1 and $10 billion in assets as they file for Chapter 7 bankruptcy. Today, the Tricolor Auto location off of 50.
If you've got an old vehicle that they're holding and they haven't, sold, so to speak, you got an asset there that's just losing value. So I don't know what's in their contracts because I haven't read their contracts. So I've got no idea the type of contract this person has actually signed. But for him to be unhappy, there must have been some sort of that they would possibly sell the vehicle and then he would get a reduction of a certain amount from his debt. A bit like we have bridging loans when you go from one house to another. So if it's sort of he's caught in between, and he's still up for the whole loan for the vehicle, and he hasn't actually been able to get any reduction or whatever. I'm not sure about. I haven't read his contracts. I don't know. There could be other people in very similar circumstances. I don't know how the American system, the car dealership works. Okay, I live in Australia, but yeah, that would be concerning.
Nine-year Chimney Rock is now non-existent, just 10 days since our last story. A sign now posted for lease on their gate.
Why should I have to pay for a vehicle that if they're going to breach the contract and not contact anybody, just leave everybody high and dry? Why should we have to do the same?
Automotive expert Brian Moody says it's important to not miss your payments, even if the dealership has gone bankrupt.
No matter what anybody says, you should keep paying the loan. And here's why. If you got a car from one of these dealerships, Tricolor being one.
And he's right. It's contract law. You can't violate, if you default, you can't argue, they went bankrupt. I didn't think that I had to pay or whatever. No. They're creditors. There are people that come in that basically deal with bankruptcy cases. It's usually lawyers and certain accountants that specialise in these sort of things. They come in, they take control of that organisation, and then pretty much in accordance to the law of each country, divvy up who needs to get what payments and how certain things get sorted out. If you default, if you basically don't pay your then you could find yourself losing all the money you've paid, including the vehicle. So you'd be in a worse situation. But unfortunately, a lot of people aren't aware of these things and say, oh, they've gone bankrupt. I don't need to pay. No, there are still contracts there. You've signed a contract and you still have an obligation because, that's still, these people took out loans. They took out loans from JP Morgan, Barclays, and a number of other shadow banks. And so they owe them money. So those people are going to come and get their cut, and you're going to be part of their cut. So, yeah, and I think there's about 89,000 vehicles out of the 100,000 plus that, I'm trying to think now, that have got GPSs and they can track them and repossess them if they need to.
Your loan is not with the dealership, most likely. It's with a financial institution.
Moody
Exactly.
says it's extremely important for
That is exactly it. They're the middlemen.
all customers to keep their paperwork because it's binding whether or not the dealership is in business.
If you know that you're still getting a bill from your old car that you traded in, you need to call the lender right away and show them the paperwork and explain to them what's happened.
He also recommends getting legal help. As for Tricolor Auto, their website confirms they're no longer offering financing or sales, but urge customers to keep making their usual payments. Daniela Hurtado, ABC 13 Eyewitness News.
So, yeah, if you're in that sort of situation, make sure you keep your payments going. Otherwise, you'll find yourself in deep shit. So let me just stop that. So really, this is, I think, one of the early signs that things are starting to unravel in the US in particular. But I've even seen signs in Australia as well where things are starting to, certain businesses, there are more businesses, even in Hobart that I've noticed more smaller businesses going out of business, and you go, what's happening? There's more for lease signs. So all these are sort of indications that there is, I even see people at work, even though their salary hasn't changed, it's the same sort of thing. It's actually probably even gone up a few percentage points. But the cost of living, because of the money printing of the government, the reduction in purchasing power, and people are sort of pulling back on a bit of their own expenditures. You see the different foods that they buy, or sometimes, people that were mostly buying now some occasionally bring in food from home, like leftovers and stuff like that. So there's definitely people are feeling the pinch to different levels. Different societies like Britain, the United States and others are going to feel the pinch far more because their things have eroded far more than places like Australia and a few other places. So it will vary from country to country and region within a country from region. So, nothing's identical. But there is a general trend that things are unraveling globally. We can see it in China, we can see it in East Asia, we can see it in Southeast Asia, we can see it in different parts. The Argentinians recently voted in the Peronists in the Buenos Aires region. Well, that was a bit of a crazy decision on their part because what it's actually done is anybody that gets the Buenos Aires region, and they got about 58%, that sort of indicates to me, as an investor, that likely that will be the new future president from the Peronist party. And we know what those socialist crazies will do. They'll start money printing again like mad and debasing the currency. And already the peso has fallen by 10%, and the general market has also done a bit of a drop as well. That's not accidental, and it's going to make Malay's job even harder, let alone he got involved in a dam via his sister, who was approached by some business person in Argentina who's into the, you could say, into the sort of derivatives markets and all these and coin markets and stuff like that. And he was able to get them to sponsor this Hayden Davis, who an American guy, with his brother and father Thomas. These people were in the sort of pump and dump of the meme coin of Melania Trump. So it seems that these characters, technically they're not doing anything illegal, but it seems they're picking all these celebrities, and now they're even venturing out of the country, celebrities, and they're selling them on a meme coin, and they are walking away with a lot. I think they need to be investigated, these people. Whether it will be done or not, who knows? But people have lost money in Argentina. People have lost money in the United States and in other parts of the world from these type of characters. So that's unfortunate for them down there, but it's actually left a bit of a taint on Malay's family, and now they're not looking clean. These things happen. You've got to be very careful who you get in business with and who you have dealings with, because when you're at the top, every con man is trying to get close to you to try and use you for influence so they can run their con, whether it's a meme coin or whatever else. You've got to be very careful. The more successful you become, the more you find all these new friends. Are they friends? Most likely, 99% are not. It's only the people that have stayed with you for a very long time. Only they are really reliable friends. And they tend to tell you that they don't really like these people. You should listen to that, because usually that is. They will stroke. That's what all con men do. Stroke your ego. Stroke your ego. And people that are susceptible to be having their ego stroked, somebody loves you too much, they just met you and they've become your best friend, it's usually a sign that they're a con artist. So keep that in mind. Friendships are built over time. They're not built within a couple of days or a couple of weeks or whatever. It's slow, because there is both sides are taking it easy, taking a cautious position as they develop the relationship. One side coming in very hard and being your best mate when they've just met you, that should always be a red sign for you. It's the way salesmen actually work as well. So that should give it away. Con artists use similar techniques. So keep that in mind, how to recognise such people, because I always put them to the test, because people like that, and they always fail, because that means they have to do more than they want to do. So anyway, that's a long story for another day. But the thing that you need to keep in mind is that things are starting to unravel. We can see now that there is pressure in the shadow banking sector. We saw it in China within the real estate market, where the government had to come in and deliberately start tearing down buildings in order to shore up the values of those properties, and also to recapitalise part of the shadow banking sector and suppress part of it, because it was getting completely out of hand. But what they missed was that they thought that they could put a lot of money into manufacturing and promote it and push it hard, and now they've actually created a glut of surplus of services and goods, and they're finding it hard to sell them, because everybody's maxed out in terms of debt, household debt around the world, including China. And if you're going to do anything, people say, well, China's got a couple of $1 trillion in their booty. Well, what's the debt of the Chinese population? The actual population that do all the buying of things? Well, it's probably about as much as they've got in their treasure chest. If they just did a debt jubilee on a lot of the hot household debt, and I mean every country, this is the way you deal with that 80 to 100-year cycle, the major cycle, debt cycle, because all these are cycles. Every crisis is just a smaller debt cycle that actually comes to an end. And then the big one that eventually comes to an end every 80 to 10 years, that's when you need to do a debt jubilee to clear out the system in that regard. It means at the top end, that is because of the money printing is concentrating a lot of the wealth, well, it's about time they got a big haircut. Yes, they will be poorer, but they'll still be rich. But it will mean that that less than 1% will basically take the haircut, take the hit. They'll still be around, but the society won't collapse. In a sense, that debt jubilee even does them a favour, because they don't understand that if they don't give that, there's always the risk of a revolution at the end of that cycle. So it actually is in their favour, even though they'll resent it and hate it. At the end of the day, that's the only way to shrink the money supply, because a debt jubilee, money is debt. Remember, credit and debt are just the other side of the coin. You shrink the debt side, you shrink the credit side, you shrink the money in the system. That means every single dollar now is worth more, has more purchasing power. Guess what happens? Demand goes through the roof, like in the golden years of capitalism in the 50s and 60s. The US had massive debts, about the same, like in 1946, the US had a debt to GDP of 100 and, what was it? 126, was it around there? They had the highest debt. It's only recently I think the US has just surpassed that level. I have to take a look. So you think the US hasn't been in that so high government debt? Yep, it has. Guess what was very low? Household debt, because the 1930s and the war, those years flushed out all that debt. Guess what happened with all that cheap energy and that industrial production? People coming back and working, creating massive demand for houses, for goods, for white goods and all sorts of things. It was boom years. The golden years of capitalism, they were called. Big middle classes, big boom. That's how you do it. Now, you can go through 15 years of hell, or you can do a haircut. They're not willing to do a haircut. You can passively just say, what are the bankers going to do if you shrink them by 70 or 90%? They can't do anything. They'll be smaller. They'll still be multi-billionaires, but they won't be hundreds or 200 or 400. They'll be something like, if you're rather than 400, you'll be down to 40, as an example. A couple of billionaires would be down to multiple hundreds, maybe 200 million rather than a couple of billion. But in the end, they'll still be wealthier than the rest, and they'll still be able to purchase because assets will have become cheaper. So in relation to what they have and what the asset prices are, they won't be much different. They'll be able to purchase more and have more capacity as well. What they won't be able to be doing is making those incredible bigger profits year on year. But you can only do that for a certain period of time until the system collapses, and then you lose everything. So even they are fools to think that they can get away with it. Most of them think, I can escape. I can take my money to Hong Kong or somewhere else and get away from the collapse. They always think that they can do something like that until the revolution picks up pace and takes them out faster than they, or some big crisis takes them out faster than they can actually take an action to protect what they've got. So sometimes greedy men that push politicians to the edge of stupidity because of their greed and because they own them and control them, they end up stuffing up the system that would have basically kept them alive or kept them in good nick had they otherwise. Yes, less, but safer for them as well. What can you do? Greedy men cannot see beyond their greed in many cases, which is unfortunate. That is why we need citizens to step up that are knowledgeable and all that and start telling people this sort of stuff. Doing these contrasts and explaining what happened in the 1950s and 60s. Where was our debt level? So people don't use the bullshit and say, why? Because we got rid of household debt. It's household debt that's pulling down the whole economy. Because purchasing power has collapsed. If you can't buy goods and services, businesses can't stay in business. It's just as logical and simple as that. They're so focused on the banking system and all this funny money and all these other financial instruments of carving up debt. and stuff like that, whether mortgage-backed securities or CDOs or part of the repo market, short-term type activities. They're all into this sort of whether government debt or private debt and playing around with that, because it's like a casino with more money. You know, it's excitement. But the reality is when things go south, yeah, it doesn't look pretty. Let's put it that way. And unfortunately, people are not focused on the downside, always to the upside. And that is, and when they do, when the downside happens, then they don't recover for a long time because they're too scared, they've lost, they become the complete opposite, you know, depressed, lost hope and stuff like that. And that's unfortunately that, how can I say it, that weakness in our human psychology, that we can fall in that, where people that can control their emotions and step back and think, they can go, okay, I need to put myself in a good position. Don't tell anyone as well. Be smart. Don't be a fool. When things go bad, anyone that's holding good stuff, yeah, isn't liked very much. So mum's the word, so to speak. And protect those things and then find the opportunities, because they will come after things unravel, because these clowns are not going to fix it. You know, you can try and talk to some politicians that you may know and try and encourage them to understand this sort of stuff, and how debt jubilee is really important to be able to put back money into people's pockets to provide demand, new, fresh demand. But that means a debt jubilee. You've got to, in order to amplify that demand, you've got to bring back the purchasing power to the currency. To bring back the purchasing power to the currency, you have to reduce the debts, the private debts of the population. I'm not concerned about the government debt. That will get sorted out as people start purchasing more. There's more economic activity, and society is ramming up growth. Guess what happens? GDP goes up substantially, and debt to GDP declines, and the government gets more in taxes to be able to pay for most of this sort of stuff. So don't worry about the government debt. Focus on the private debt, the household debt. That is the critical. That is the steam engine of the economy. If that is suppressed, the economy can't grow. It falls into severe depression. That's what happens every single time. Extreme deflation. And that's where we're heading for. And if people don't understand that, they are ignoring history. Simple as that. This happens every single time. You go back and look at the 1930s, go back to the middle of the 19th century in the long recession. You look at it may be different technology, different markets, different products or whatever, but the signs are similar. You know, the actual purchasing capacity within the population goes down. Every single time goes down. And currency also loses value in the same period. It gets devalued for whatever reason. And that has ramifications, because it means that when that purchasing goes down, and they know it, these assholes know it, guess what they do? They go to a war economy. They start wars, because you can put money, a whole lot of government money, into wars and keep, you know, Mercedes can become a tank producer. They don't need to produce cars. They can produce tanks for the government. And there's plenty of fools that will go and operate them and go and kill themselves. So this is what I'm saying. This is what happens each time. They don't fix the problems. They go to war, then fix the big crisis that comes. We are at that point where the global crisis is here. We can't get away from it. And we have leaders who are unwilling to reset the system, a debt jubilee, and reset the system, and possibly even have another conference, a Bretton Woods type conference, to reset as part of the trade agenda as well. But it's not happening because, unfortunately, the clowns that we have that are in there are not the high-end intellectuals. You know, they're not the bright people. We don't have the people like Harry Truman. We don't have people like Eisenhower. We don't have those people. You know, we're missing these people. And even Churchill, people may dislike him. I dislike him for certain reasons, but he was a statesman, a great leader. Those sort of people are the people that are going to come up with really better solutions to stabilize. They realize that you need to pull things together. The clowns are out there trying to entertain you. That's not fixing your problems. You need people that want to fix your problems in that regard. And unfortunately, we don't have people like that. And I'm disappointed in Trump as well, because I expected more from him. He's actually appointed some good people in his administration, like JFK Jr. and a few others. The problem is that he himself has emotional. He's erratic. He has difficulty managing his own emotions. He's fine as a real estate person to use that interplay, that bravado and all that sort of stuff. That works fine for a situation where you're working with, people like builders and possibly mafia bosses that control the building unions and people like that, to that sort of intimidation, those sort of tactics to get a deal with people like that. But here you're dealing with nations that have got national interest, geopolitical interest, and an economic interest, and a whole populace that wants certain things from those people. And it's a much more complex environment. And here you really need people that have got far more intellectual capacity. I'm not saying that the people that he's appointed aren't are bad people. No. The problem is he's got certain people, like in the financial area, people that basically come from the existing sick system that doesn't want to change. And they're advising him on similar economic policies that are not going to fix the problem. It's just going to exacerbate and probably drive us into war long term. And maybe that's what they want. He has no idea that he's being manipulated, because he's not an economist, but he's appointed people that think that they can start a financial war, and that financial war somehow is not going to end in a hot war. Really? Are you that crazy? Haven't you looked back in history? Before the First World War, before the Second World War, there was already financial warfare and political sort of tension and actions being taken against other countries before it broke out into a full war. That's what happens. Do you remember the Americans? Their sanctions against the Japanese, cutting them off their oil, forcing Australia to stop selling them, iron ore, and all these other things. They weren't part of economic warfare. They were exactly economic warfare. When you initiate economic warfare, you end up in hot warfare after. And that's where they're heading. And in the nuclear age, get ready to glow in the dark, is what I say. And start, learning how to survive in that sort of environment. Because these characters are unleashing forces that they cannot control. And that is the danger. And the funny thing is, somebody like Putin is far more stable than all these characters. He isn't pushing hard, even though in the Duma, the entire opposition, Communist Party is the biggest party. Second biggest party is the Socialist Party. which are close allies of the communists. The third biggest party, is of the opposition, is a nationalist party which is critical of Putin, is actually even far more, wants to be a bit more aggressive towards, actually wants to hit some NATO countries, some of their people have said. And then there's a couple of other sort of a centrist party, which is a sort of a light version, but still has strong nationalistic sort of attitudes. And then three dependents. That's about it. And then the major party, which is United Russia Party, which is Putin's party. But the opposition, the majority, actually want a tougher line against the West, a really hard line against the West. In particular, the key opposition party, which is the Communist Party of the Russian Federation. And they've basically said, the gloves should come off with NATO. So he's a moderate. Do you understand that? This is the problem, the West. Putin's a moderate. He actually wanted to join NATO, have good relationships with Bush and all these people. They told him no, 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 and pushed him back. And started then undermining his presidency and his government, then wondered why he got pissed off with them. Remember, he was one of the young global leaders of the WEF, the World Economic Forum. He was in that as one of the young global leaders like Macron and many others. You think he's not a moderate? But he's been betrayed, and that's why he's pissed off with these clowns. But he's moderate enough to realise that if he allows the crazies in his own country with the crazies that are in the West to go at each other, we'll be in World War III. That's what he's trying to avoid. He's trying to achieve peace. He's trying to balance World War III with the strategic objectives of avoiding having NATO close to his borders. It's a hard balancing act. He's not doing too bad considering the sort of forces allied against him. And, I think people need to be less critical. I would say, thank God we have somebody like him and not some other crazy Russian leader that basically would decide to launch a few missiles and a few nukes and hit the Ukraine with nukes. So if the communists were in, the current people, I suspect some of them would have already used tactical nukes against the Ukraine. But people understand this. These people are critical. They're telling Putin, you're soft on the West. We consider Putin not soft at all. They consider him soft. And I go, people want to topple Putin. I go, who's the next biggest opposition party? The Communist Party of the Russian Federation. So are you fuckers insane? You want to put them back in power and topple Putin? Because that's what you're going to do. The second biggest party, guess what? Who the second biggest party is? The Socialist Party, close allies, and in talks about uniting and joining the two parties. What can I say? This is the problem when people in the West, in particular like Victoria North and all these other nutcases, have no idea about the politics of Eastern Europe completely, but they think they're experts and they can tell us what should be done and how we should approach these people. Absolute madness. This is the political crisis, the economic crisis that we are living through. I hope we can survive it. But what I'm telling you is, with the numbskulls that we have in the leadership of our countries who do not understand that we need to pull back from the brink, we need a debt jubilee for the common people to basically be able to reset the system in that way, not in the way that the top bankers and others want it, to basically turn us into serfs, into a rentier society. We're all impoverished and the little servants of theirs. That's what they want. and their political masters are trying to do that and reducing our freedoms and all that. It's all part of that plan. War and impoverishment and slavery. That is the way. So we have to wake up. We're either going to basically fight against them, or we're going to submit to slavery, warfare, and poverty. You need to make the choice, because the choices are becoming stark. And they can keep on, they don't care. You think, oh, I'm a middle class, I'm a small business person, I've got plenty of dosh. See how long you last when they flood the economy full of fake money. And then they start running laws that allow the banks to appropriate everything. And since the majority of the banks are controlled by BlackRock, Larry Finn, our lovely friend Larry Finn, and many of these other colourful characters, see how long that wealth stays with you. Middle class people are being wiped out, and small businesses. This is a small elite at the top, and they want it all, and they want to control it all. And either you, as a small business person, start uniting with your working class, citizen and others in your society, and start organising against these people, because these people are coming after all of us, not just the workers. And this is the problem. People, forget that they think, oh, it's the old saying like that. When they came after the Jews, I said nothing. And when they started coming up after everyone else, then it was too late. There was nobody there to save me. Well, it could be the same situation. So we need to basically wake up to ourselves and start putting on maximum pressure. If we want to prevent ourselves from glowing in the dark and saving our societies, our families, we have to step up as citizens and start pushing back against all this nonsense, because it's not going to work any other way. If we're going to try to reset the system in the right way, that's the only way of doing it. It's not going to happen any other way. There's no magical way of actually doing it. If you look at even a lot of their private debts and stuff like that, they're in a couple of trillion. If you were to divert $1 trillion over 10 years, you could pretty much, and you were to sell that debt as a future liability, you could probably cover a lot of that. But if you and that you'd get it all back, because the economy would recover and do really well. You'd be booming the economy. Nobody is thinking of that. Not at all. So that's another way. You don't take anything from the banks. You don't take anything from anyone. No debt jubilee. You just basically take more debt and pay off people's debts. And a bit like, when you inflate the debt away, something similar. You basically just take on full debt, you inflate it away, you wipe it out, and then what do you think happens when that shrinks? So does the money supply, and so does all that. Poof. So there are ways, because it's a new debt, but all this other debt down here is gone. So you've rebalanced. The same amount of debt exists in the system, but just the government now owns a bit more, and the citizenry down here, the households, own practically zero. Guess what? Who's going to be purchasing iPhones and whatever else? Not the government. It's going to be the people down here, the millions of people down here that have got debt relief, real debt relief. Yes, you may call it socialism, but when they were handing it out to the banks and all that, you didn't call it socialism. Some of you did. This is probably better socialism, because it basically resets the system without and creating new demand. So it's probably a better thing, because the reality is no system is perfect. Every single system that humans have created, including capitalism, are imperfect systems. Only God has a perfect paradise for us. All human constructs are flawed and always fail. That's why they're in constant crisis and unstable. because our systems are created by humans, not God, and that's why they fall apart. So stop believing in these systems blindly, only in God. He's the one who loves us, our creator. All this other nonsense is just noise. And that's what we need to realise. And we need to point to these politicians that they need to prioritise, as good Christians as they say they are, the people and their suffering. Do something for them. You and not use any foul language, because I know what will happen. So, but you know what I mean. It's, where's their love for their people? I don't want words. I want deeds. Anyway, I'll leave it at that. Now go away and annoy those politicians, and if they don't do it, you only say to politicians, this is what I want, and if you're not prepared to do it, I'm not voting for you. And you need to promote it through your social media and everything. Make it go viral. Debt Jubilee, make it go viral. You put that Debt Jubilee for the plebs, make it go viral. If you're going to do anything, do that. You don't even have to share my content, okay? I've got a day job. I'm just providing information. If you want to do the nice thing towards me and promote it and, send it to your friends so they can, have their eyes opened, fine. But ultimately, if we want to reset the system, we need to bring back demand. Every single time we end up in warfare or depression for a very long time before we clear out all the household debt. And then people have new jobs and are able to purchase things because they don't have much, practically no debt. Governments can have massive debts. Remember the debt to GDP, as I said, 1940, back in the 1946, higher debt to GDP than what today the US had. And after that, we had the golden years of capitalism. How do you think that happened? Well, it's because the people were out there buying things. And as they were buying things, guess what was happening? Demand was growing. Businesses were being created. The economy was expanding. That's what was happening. And debt to GDP was shrinking, not because the governments were doing it. They were still spending because they were fighting the Soviet threat. But it was basically, yes, they didn't do a lot of cuts. Harry Truman did for a small period of time, and after that, nobody did. Let's just be honest about that. The debt still grew. What changed the whole thing was the debt to GDP, not the amount of debt, but the amount of debt shrunk. Remember what happened in Greece when there was a collapse in the economy, and the economy shrunk by 25 to 30%? What happened? The debt blew out because now the GDP is smaller. The same amount of debt in euros hadn't changed, was still 330 odd billion, hadn't changed, but the economy had gone from around the 300 all the way down to about 250 odd or whatever. So it shrunk quite a bit. So that austerity shrunk the economy and actually blew out the debt even further. It's not like your household debt. Your household debt is different. You're getting an income which is fixed. It doesn't grow. So your debt to your income is always going to be growing if you're spending more. But an economy, if it's growing more, the economy, because of the activity of the people in that economy, it's not one entity, it's multiple entities. Those can lift up the economy and the GDP. And so the government can have the same level of debt, but its debt to GDP will keep on shrinking because of all the other activity of everyone else. The aggregate total, completely different from a household debt. So even that is nonsense that people tell you. It's bullshit, So worry less about government debt, worry more about household debt, the private debt. That's where the biggest problem is. We need to bring down private debt. household debt in particular, because the household debt, if it's low, guess what they're gonna be doing? They're going to be going out there and spending. I want a new iPhone. I want a new car. I want this. I want a new TV, whatever. New LCD screen, and blah, blah, blah. New laptop, whatever. That's how you get the economy to grow and expand. And because the money supply sort of reduces when you take out all that debt, now you've actually got the purchasing power of every one of those dollars goes up. The advantage is there now people can afford homes because they've come down quite a bit and they're more affordable. So everything becomes more affordable. So everything starts growing. Every sector is in boom time, like in the 50s and 60s and the late 40s. Not rocket science. We can go back multiple times in history and see the same sort of cycles. This isn't new. But if you don't have knowledge of economic history, it seems like, oh, this has happened before. Not in your lifetime, but in multiple other people's lifetime, it has bloody happened. And it's been recorded in history. You're just ignorant and unaware of it. And there are many people, this is a frightening thing, there are many economists and people in finance in America, in business and other areas that are completely oblivious to this history. That's the most frightening thing, let me just tell you. Anyway, I've ranted enough. I've said enough. You have been warned about what's coming. So is the new Great Depression coming closer and closer? Yes, it is. Can it be avoided with the current crop of politicians? Unlikely. But if the citizenry starts picking up their friggin' act and start doing something to engage those politicians into conversations about the sort of reforms that are required, maybe we can avoid the worst. Maybe. No guarantees. It's all up to us, plebs, to start making more noise. Stop sitting in front of your TV like a couch potato waiting to die. Get off your fucking effing asses and get out there and start pushing, pressuring, going to all sorts of things. The woke stuff, going to school meetings or whatever, you push back, you tell them, put them back in their box, call them out, vote them out, get rid of them, start becoming active. People need to take back their society. Nobody else is going to do it unless we do it. It's up to us to take back and start demanding different policies and different ways. Otherwise, we could be all glowing in the dark. And I don't think I would like in my 60s to be glowing in the dark. Maybe it'll give me a bit more colour, who knows, but it's not the colour that I want. Anyway, we'll leave it at that. Have a good one. See yous.